Today is the 22nd of July, and here is a quick recap of what is happening in the US-Iran war. There's a lot of developments, and it seems like Iran has now pushed a lot of US assets away from the Gulf countries where the US has a lot of bases because Iran is just throwing a lot of missiles at those US bases. And if you remember, a part of the MOU is that the US will remove a lot of their presence away from Iran. Well, obviously, the MOU has been abolished, but Iran is helping the US achieve that by pushing those assets away from the Gulf countries. And now, how do we know that? Well, we can see a lot of airplanes are moving on flight tracker from the Gulf country bases to Jordan and to Israel. We can see from the satellite images there's been a lot of damage to those US bases. And the intensity of the bombs against Iran by the US has actually reduced, which is very interesting because Trump did say after the death of those US soldiers in Jordan and Iraq that we're going to open the gates of hell. But the US is reducing their bombs on Iran, and that's because they have to fly all the way from Jordan, they have to fly all the way from Israel, or the aircraft carriers in the region, which is kind of moving away from Iran because of the threat. And so because of that distance, it takes a long time for an airplane to go from Jordan or from Israel all the way to Iran, drop the bombs, and then come back. And in 24 hours, because of that distance, you can do less and less of those activities, as opposed to if you're flying from Saudi Arabia or from Qatar or from Kuwait. Now, here are the targets that the Iranians have hit in the last 48 hours. So here, Iran published a satellite image. And that's the interesting thing, because people say, oh, Iran's not hitting their targets. Well, we can see from the satellite images that there's been damages. And, on the show, we've been showing you in the past couple of week or so, the damage is being done. But this was just yesterday, where this is a radar system in Kuwait that was destroyed. This is before and after images. And, between over here, this was in the Muwafaq Salty Air Base, where they hit a whole, seems like a hang. Apparently, an F-15 was destroyed as part of that. But this was from the 20th of July to the 22nd of July. These are the attacks that were carried out as stated by Iran. A lot of them are in Kuwait. So you can see from here, long-range radar systems, communication centers, anti-missile radar. At the air base, there's the MQ-9 drones, early warning radars, tactical radar unit. And at the Ahmed al-Jabr Air Base, early warning radar also, and Patriot systems. There's also the HIMARS missile launchers. So these are the launchers that these are not defense missiles, that, interceptors that intercept missiles from Iran. These actually go from land, from Kuwait into Iran to attack, targets in Iran itself. And they also hit in Camp Buhering, the helicopter parking, and in the Bubiyan Island, the radar system. So they're taking it a lot on Kuwait because it seems like Kuwait has just allowed their land to be used in whatever manner the US wants, unlike some of the other countries like the UAE, which seems to have stopped, allowing the Americans to use their land. Same thing with Qatar, and to some extent Saudi Arabia, although we're going to show you some flights coming out of Saudi Arabia that are supporting the US in their attacks. In Bahrain, you've got the air defense systems, you've got US soldiers' positions, and US Patriot and air defense systems. And also they actually hit an Amazon company data center, which Iran said that is helping the army, the US military. And of course, all those AI companies do have contracts with the military to provide services to help them carry out their activities. Of course, I'm not justifying those attacks. I'm just saying from an Iran's perspective, that is what they're thinking. And in Jordan, they've hit anti-missile radar systems and an F-15 in a hangar. I just showed you the damage to that hangar. And then from the 21st to the 22nd of July, so this was actually created by Mensch Osint on X. I would highly recommend following him. So targets mentioned in statements. So Kuwait, again, ammo depot, logistical equipment. So don't forget, every time that Iran hits something in Kuwait or whatever those areas, we can actually see some flights coming from Europe, American flights, to those places to replenish the ammunition, or to other places, or to kind of replace damaged equipment, things like that. Jordan, Muwafaq Salty Air Base, accommodation and welfare buildings and equipment depot. So that has probably resulted in some casualties that the U.S. will, share later on. And then in Bahrain, the Sheikh Isa Air Base, large equipment warehouses and hangars, heavy aircraft maintenance and storage facilities. So, this is a different Iran completely. The previous Iran would play it very safe. They would wait for the U.S. to attack and they would want to stop. And they're kind of waiting for the U.S. to attack so they can retaliate. Iran's not having this new Iran that, the U.S. and Israel have awoken, that seems to be, that was in hibernation, is now, if you start, we're going to continue. We're not going to allow you to hit us. If we're going to see an opportunity to take out, launchers that you're going to launch into Iran, well, we're going to take them out before you launch them. It's much of a more offensive stance than just defensive. Because let's be honest, the defensive stance that Iran had before this war didn't work for Iran. The U.S. would attack, Iran would do kind of like not really retaliate that strong, mostly symbolic retaliation. And what that did was, the U.S. thought that Iran is weak because they're not retaliating. And so they'd continue doing that. They'd hit Soleimani, General Soleimani. Iran didn't retaliate. They hit Iran, some leaders from Gaza were there, Hamas. They killed them there in Iran. Iran didn't retaliate. Last year, they attacked the nuclear facilities. U.S. did. Iran didn't really retaliate against the U.S. They did like a symbolic attack on Udaid in Qatar, but that was agreed with the U.S. So again, every time the U.S. does something, Iran doesn't retaliate. What the U.S. learns from that is that Iran is weak. Well, that strategy didn't work for Iran. This is their new strategy, and it seems to be working better for Iran, from what we understand. So for Iran, the attacks on them by the U.S. So the U.S. attacked Shabahar several times. Explosion sounds were reported in Konark, mountains of Shiraz, Bandar Abbas, Kashim Island, and U.S. possibly struck a radar site at Shiraz Mountains. So, if you look at the map, most of the attacks, so they've got Shiraz over here, you've got Bushehr was attacked also, you've got Kashim Island is right here. Let's remove this. Kashim Island is right here. Bandar Abbas is over here. Bandar Abbas and Kashim, these are all areas that allow Iran to control the Strait of Hormuz. The idea is that that's what the U.S. is trying to degrade, Iran's ability to control the Strait of Hormuz. But it's not going to work because to control, to cause tankers not to risk it, or insurance not to insure, tankers moving through the Strait of Hormuz is simply, you just need a couple of drones to, threat, to make a point that, hey, if you don't agree this passage with Iran, you're going to be attacked. And so forces everyone to deal with Iran, because it only takes a drone or a missile to make a point. And you don't need to throw a missile or a drone from Bandar Abbas. You've got all this area over here that can be used even deep inside Iran, because of these missiles that have a long range, and even the drones have a long range. And so it's kind of doesn't make sense why you're doing this if the objective is to degrade Iran's ability to control the Strait of Hormuz, because that's not an achievable thing. And in reality, there's no military ability to achieve that. It has to be done through diplomatic means. And some other attacks. So here, U.S. attacked Kongavar in Kremenshah province, likely targeting one of Iran's smaller missile facilities. U.S. intensively shelled Bahrain with missiles from HIMARS systems. Governor of Hamadan confirmed several locations in Khabudurhang country targeting the air base. Benes city in Kurdistan province was also targeting telecommunication systems. There's explosions were also reported in Bushehr port, at the military center south of Tabriz, Bandar Abbas, Sirik, Shabahar, and Mashhar. And air defenses were activated in eastern Tehran, but there were no air attacks. One hostile drone was spotted, which was shot down. So, all the attacks are mostly in the southern western part of Iran, with some attacks in the northwestern part, such as in the Kurdistan area, Kurdistan province. Here's interesting, we said that most of the flights now have moved, as you can see from here on flight radar, to Jordan, to Israel. That's where they're actually carrying out their attacks into Iran, and also from the aircraft carriers that are somewhere over here in the Sea of Oman or Arabian Sea. But what happens also at the same time, when these flights go and carry out the attacks, beforehand, the U.S. would launch the E-3G AWACS which actually take off from Prince Sultan Air Base in Saudi Arabia. And usually after 2 hours from when this flight comes up, you know there's going to be attacks in about 2 hours from when we see this. What does this AWACS airplane do? If you remember, they have this weird circular thing at the top, and in fact, Iran actually shot one of them, destroyed one of them in Saudi Arabia in the first stage of the war. Well, it's like an airborne radar system, essentially, large rotating radar dome. They have a 360-degree surveillance capability, covers 250-mile radius all around, monitors from surface to stratosphere, so really high up. Multiple role operations, air and maritime surveillance, command and control, battle management, threat detection and tracking. And so they track aircraft, missiles, drones, guides fighter jets and intercept missions, links with ground command centers, identifies and classifies threats, tracks multiple targets simultaneously, technology and upgrades. So it's basically like a huge radar system in the air that manages to help the air jets that are going to go carry attacks, kind of to identify what is a target, what is an enemy, what is a friendly object there, and help them achieve their objectives and identify threats. But there's only, I think, 6 of those available to the U.S. One of them got destroyed. One of them is here. Not all of them are in the Middle East, like they have them in other places. But that's how, for example, when we say the Gulf countries, if it wasn't for the Gulf countries, America wouldn't be able to do those things, because those flights are coming from U.S. bases in Gulf countries, and it would be very hard to carry out attacks. Or the U.S. still could carry out attacks, but it would be much harder, takes longer, the effectiveness would be much less if they weren't able to use the U.S. bases in the Gulf countries. And of course, the U.S. is in big trouble. And we can see over here in the Washington Post, the Pentagon sinks billions into Iran war, and it's quickly running short on cash. But before we go into that, they show kind of the U.S. deaths in the Iran war between February 28th, which is when the war started, to, just 2 days ago. So you've got in Iraq, in fact, most of the deaths seem to be in Iraq. Either there was a refueling aircraft crash, which killed 6, a controlled detonation of Iranian drone, which was the other day. That was in north of Iraq. Strike on Muwafaq Salti Air Base, 2 died over there, but there's also 1 that was missing, which is now, they're pronounced dead. They're pronounced dead, and America has pronounced them as dead. And the strike on Port Shuaibah in Kuwait, 6 killed over there. Strike on Prince Sultan Air Base, 1, and the helicopter emergency landing in the Arabian Sea, 1 died over there. That's what the U.S. is saying officially. Has the people killed, but there might be more. We don't know about the severely injured. So here's interesting about ammunition and how low they are on ammunition, which is why the Department of War is wanting more money from Congress. The Pentagon later missed the panel's deadline and has since failed to share requested details for weeks, including the number of precision weapons the military has in its inventories after burning through thousands of munitions in Iran. Hexat has at times dismissed concerns about munition shortages, telling CBS News in an interview last month that U.S. stockpiles were great and they're only getting stronger. Okay. In private, Pentagon officials have expressed far greater anxiety. So this is the Pentagon expressing anxiety, according to current informant officials, arguing that the military desperately needs more money to restock munitions needed to deter U.S. adversaries like Russia and China. After receiving a private briefing from top Pentagon officials, Malcolm said replenishing these weapons was clearly a top administration priority, and that Pentagon officials other than Hexat were very concerned that lawmakers were not receiving the information they needed to make decisions on additional funding. This year's defense budget is about $1 trillion, including $150 billion in one-time funding Congress approved last year for a range of military priorities, from advanced weapon systems to energizing the U.S. defense industry. The Trump administration has requested $1.5 trillion for 2027, a massive increase that has sparked a fierce debate on Capitol Hill. $1.5 trillion. Now, if you were going to reduce the war, kind of take a step back, why would you need $1.5 trillion? An increase of 50% compared to what you have right now, which is already a record-breaking, i.e. $1 trillion. The damage that Iran has caused to the U.S. is not being publicly shared by the U.S. government for obvious reasons. Why would they? They say that this has cost $37 billion, what Pete Hexat has said. I mean, that is a very, very conservative number because they're not really sharing how much they've used in terms of their ammunition. But the Wall Street Journal showed in an old article, actually, where they said that for some interceptors, these are the defense missiles, which cost about, from 500,000 to 5 million for some interceptors. They've used 10 years supply that they had in their inventory. 10-year supply. They've used it up in about 40 days of war. That's how much missiles that Iran was throwing. If you remember at the beginning, they were throwing so much at Israel and the Gulf countries. Well, they were using up all these interceptors by the U.S. And now the situation is that there isn't any, not enough U.S. interceptors. And the problem isn't even about the money. The problem is the rare earth minerals. These missiles, these interceptors require rare earth minerals. Now, where are all the rare earth minerals processed and produced? In China. This is the thing that I just can't believe it, that the U.S. allowed themselves to be in a situation where 95% of processed rare earth minerals that are required in missiles, in electric vehicles, and solar are processed. They allowed it to be processed in China, 95%. And now they've just suddenly woken up and realized, wow, we need that, we need to have some control over some of that processed rare earth minerals. And that's going to take years to do. And China has limited their exports to the U.S. because they also know that China is the ultimate enemy of the U.S. And a lot of what the U.S. is trying to do over here is indirectly attacking China, whether it's cutting their energy supply that comes from Venezuela and attempting it with Iran, whether it's destroying the corridor, the trade corridor that goes from China all the way across a number of countries to Iran as part of the Belt Road Initiative. And of course, just last week, Trump came up and said that China has been meddling in U.S. elections. He keeps on targeting, China. And so for China, why would they kind of want to help the U.S. build bombs that are going to attack China's allies and maybe eventually attack, Chinese? Well, they're attacking Chinese interests and assets already. They've done that in Iran, where they've attacked the Belt Road kind of initiative, where the railway that goes through Iran was attacked. That was built by China for kind of this economic initiative that allows us to pass goods from China all the way across to Iran, to bypass the Strait of Hormuz, to bypass the Strait of Malacca into kind of Eastern Europe, into Turkey, and into the western part of Russia. And so it's not just about throwing money at it, the 1.5 trillion on the ammunition. You need the rare earth minerals, and they are hard to come by because you've let China take a monopoly at processing that. And it's going to take years for you to build the base to allow the U.S. to actually process that rare earth minerals to be used in their missiles. But what is the U.S. plan for the Middle East? This is something that not many are talking about. We saw Trump in the past 2 weeks meet important leaders that are part of the plan to reshape the Middle East. Trump met the Lebanese president, Joseph Aoun, this week. He met the Iraqi prime minister last week. And he met the Syrian president, Ahmed al-Shara, or Julani, in Turkey as part of the NATO summit. This is all in preparation to attack what they call the axis of resistance, what Iran calls the unity of arena. And this is made up of mainly 4 groups. Of course, there is Iran, there is Ansarallah in Yemen, and Hezbollah in Lebanon, and the Popular Mobilization in Iraq. There's an objective to take out each of those 4 groups. And certain players in the Middle East will focus on one of these 4 groups. Let's start with Lebanon, where there's Hezbollah. Now, Hezbollah, and most people don't know that Lebanon is split between a third being Shia, a third being Sunni Muslim, and about a quarter being Christian, and some other minorities. Now, the majority of that 33% Shia support Hezbollah, which they see as a resistance group. Hezbollah was created in 1982 as a result of Israeli occupation into Lebanon, which also resulted into a civil war in Lebanon. Now, the majority of the Shia in the green over here live in the southern part of Lebanon, which is where a lot of the battle with Israel has been, and to the north, southeast part of Lebanon. There's going to be three players to really attack Lebanon. You've got here Syria, where Al-Shara is going to go into the southern part of Lebanon and attack Hezbollah from the east. You've got Israel, who is already occupying the southern part of Lebanon, and they're going to kind of move forward up. And then you've got the government of Lebanon, who the president is kind of getting to an agreement with Israel and the US to take Hezbollah's weapons away, which is never going to happen. Because for a lot of people, they see Hezbollah as the real defenders of Lebanon and not the army, who has done nothing with respect to the occupation of Lebanon by Israel. It is also very likely that NATO is going to support these operations. They will not have troops on the ground, but in terms of intelligence, in terms of airplanes, in terms of attacking from the air, NATO can easily be involved in this situation. And it'll be very easy because, of course, Lebanon is the closest to Europe. And Cyprus, the UK, for example, has a big base there in Cyprus. This is the first front. The second front is Ansarallah in Yemen, who have now closed the Bab el-Mandeb Strait, or more accurately, have closed it for Saudi Arabia. This is a result of Saudi Arabia having an embargo on the Ansarallah forces, which is over here in brown, which they have the western part of Yemen. The other parts of Yemen, the government-affiliated forces are supported by Saudi Arabia and the UAE. And there was a nearly 10-year battle that was happening in Yemen that caused devastation to Yemen. And now, for the past 12 years, there has been an embargo by Saudi Arabia on Ansarallah from flights to even from the sea. And Iran tried to break that embargo by landing an airplane, and Saudi Arabia attacked the airport in Sana'a, which led to the airplane having to land in Hodeidah. And as a result of that, Ansarallah attacked Saudi Arabia and said, hey, if you're going to do an embargo on us, we're going to do an embargo on you. And this moment right now is very critical. They've chosen this moment on purpose, not by force by Iran, but by the pressure point on Saudi Arabia. Because Saudi Arabia has 2 points where they can export oil, from Strait of Hormuz, which is in the eastern part, and from Yanbu, which is the Red Sea from the western part. Now, Iran has closed the Strait of Hormuz, and so Saudi Arabia mainly exports its oil now from Yanbu in the western part of the Red Sea. Well, if before this war started, Ansarallah closed the Red Sea, well, Saudi Arabia can easily just export from the Strait of Hormuz, so it wouldn't impact it massively. But given that the Strait of Hormuz is closed, if Ansarallah close Bab el-Mandeb for Saudi Arabia, that is extreme pressure on Saudi Arabia. And what is the objective here for Ansarallah? They want the embargo to be removed from their area, which has been going on for 12 years, which has caused a lot of devastation for the people. So they're using this moment as maximum pressure on Saudi Arabia. Now, who's going to be kind of tackling Ansarallah? Well, it will be Saudi Arabia, it will be the UAE, probably, and of course, Israel. Interestingly, part of Somalia has been, or Somaliland, as it's called, there are US bases and Israeli bases there that can be used to attack Ansarallah too. The problem is that if Saudi Arabia attacks Ansarallah, then Ansarallah can do massive damage to the Saudi infrastructure, oil infrastructure. And so it's a very high risk for Saudi Arabia to enter into this conflict. They can easily destroy the Yanbu port, where right now, Saudi Arabia is the only port that Saudi Arabia can use to export its oil. It can easily attack the oil infrastructure, which it has done, which is the reason why they entered into a ceasefire with Saudi Arabia, which Saudi Arabia broke by attacking the Sana'a International Airport just a couple of weeks back. We are in an era where weapons can be easily produced very cheaply, those drones that are very cheap. And so small actors can cause havoc against big actors. We're not in the olden age where, you needed a lot of money to actually kind of carry out operations. Now, you can easily produce a cheap drone very quickly and cause a lot of damage to the infrastructure. And so it's going to be very difficult for Saudi Arabia to carry out long-term attacks on Ansarallah, given the damage that Ansarallah can cause to the country. And it's the same thing with Hezbollah. Hezbollah has been very focused on southern part of Lebanon, where the Israelis have occupied and invaded. But they can easily focus on the economic structure of Israel, where, like Haifa, where there's a lot of economic activities, where there's the port, and disrupt that. indefinitely because it's so easy to create these drones. Then we go to the Popular Mobilization Front in Iraq, which are about 200,000. And that was formed, this kind of organization was formed to fight ISIS in 2014. And they're mostly Shia, backed by Iran. And interestingly, the US has forced the Iraqi prime minister to remove the weapons from the mobilization front. Here you have Iraq gives armed groups until late September to surrender weapons. Iraq has set late September as the deadline for armed groups to hand over their weapons to the state. The government announced on Monday as Washington pressures Baghdad to complete the process and amid a massive anti-corruption campaign by Prime Minister Ali al-Zaidi. The reason the US is forcing Iraq to do that is because they see that group as a threat in case America wants to send more troops to Iraq, in case Israel, as we learned a couple months ago, had some secret bases that even the Iraqi government didn't know about in Iraq to help with their attacks on Iran. And a lot of the assets that are in Iraq are not only attacked by Iran, but attacked by some of these groups, such as the Popular Mobilization Front. So they're trying to remove that threat. Now, for those groups, it's very obvious what the plan is, and especially for Iran. And so Iran's going to do everything it can to support those groups, which all have also personal interests. They don't do whatever Iran wants them to do. These groups are not dying for Iran. They're dying for their beliefs, for their country, against foreign influence. But of course, they're very strongly backed by Iran. Now, the US, of course, backs a lot of other groups in the region too. And so during Trump's term, he's going to try to flip this. Right now, Iran has the upper hand. They've destroyed all of the US bases. They're controlling, the areas where a lot of energy flows through, such as Strait of Hormuz, an alliance. Their allies, Ansarallah, are now kind of controlling the Bab el-Mandeb. And so I feel like we're heading towards the big battle over here, where in Lebanon, there might be a civil war. In Iraq, if really the government goes ahead with forcing this group to dearm, they will fight back. But the problem is we are in an era whereby small groups can do massive damage towards big groups because of the modern warfare, where it's very cheap to produce missiles, very cheap to produce drones. And so these groups can wage asymmetric warfare, something that didn't really exist to this extent, 10 years ago. But we'd love to know your thoughts about where you think we're heading with this war. Is Trump actually going to find an off-ramp and find a diplomatic solution, or he's going to dig a deeper hole for himself and wage a bigger war than he's waging right now? If you did like this video, do hit the like and subscribe, and we'll see you very soon.